The cruelest thing an alpha can do is not break your heart, but make you realize he had been measuring it for a price the entire time. Ethan Parker learned that at 9:17 p.m., standing outside the private bonding suite on the 47th floor of Blackwood Tower, with a velvet ring box in his hand and the sound of his own future being quietly rewritten behind a half-closed door. The gala downstairs was still glittering like nothing in the world had gone wrong. Champagne glasses chimed. Cameras flashed. Rich donors smiled beneath crystal chandeliers while pretending not to watch one another's bank accounts move in real time. Ethan had spent the whole evening telling himself to breathe, to stand straight, to stop smoothing the front of his white tux jacket like a nervous teenager at prom. Adrian Blackwood, Alpha CEO, public miracle, private storm, had promised him tonight would be different. No more hiding. No more quiet exits through service elevators. No more pretending Ethan was only a junior design consultant with a pretty face and a useful Omega scent. Tonight, Adrian had said, "We make this official." Ethan had believed him because love made even smart people stupid in elegant shoes. He had even brought the ring Adrian once claimed was too sentimental to wear in public, tucked safely in his palm, like a secret finally ready to become real. Then he heard Mason Reed laugh from inside the suite. Not a friendly laugh. Not the casual, bright sound Ethan knew from late-night takeout, movie marathons, and the years Mason had spent calling him family. This laugh was softer, possessive, familiar in a way it had no right to be. Ethan stopped with his hand inches from the door. Through the narrow opening, he saw Adrian standing beside the marble table, his black suit untouched by a single wrinkle, his silver blonde hair perfect, his face calm in the cold, expensive way that had made half the city fear him and the other half want him. Mason stood close enough to adjust Adrian's cuff link, wearing Ethan's favorite shade of blue and the necklace Adrian had once pressed against Ethan's throat while whispering, "Someday." On the table between them sat a bonding contract. Ethan saw his own name printed on the first page. Then he saw a second page beneath it, already signed in Mason's looping handwriting. For one strange second, Ethan's mind refused to understand. It tried to make excuses, ridiculous ones, generous ones, desperate ones. Maybe it was a business form. Maybe Mason was helping. Maybe Adrian would turn, see Ethan, smile, and explain everything before the world tilted too far to survive. Then Adrian spoke, voice smooth as winter glass. "Ethan is loyal. Too loyal. After tonight, he will sign whatever I put in front of him." Mason gave a tiny hum of satisfaction. "And if he asks about me?" Adrian's mouth curved. "He will blame himself first. He always does." Silence opened inside Ethan so completely that even the music downstairs seemed to vanish. The ring box felt suddenly heavy, like it belonged to someone foolish and dead. He did not storm in. He did not scream. Some pain was too clean for noise. Ethan simply stepped back, one careful inch at a time, while the two people he trusted most continued planning how gently they would ruin him. Ethan made it 12 steps before his knees remembered they were attached to a person who had just been hollowed out from the inside. He caught himself against the hallway wall, fingertips sliding over polished black marble so cold it felt almost kind. Behind him, the bonding suite door stayed half open, warm light spilling across the carpet like a lie that had learned how to glow. He should have gone downstairs. He should have smiled for the cameras, found the nearest exit, called a car, done something clean and adult and quiet. Instead, he walked toward the service elevator because his body had chosen survival before his pride could file an objection. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that sounded far too cheerful. Ethan stepped inside, pressed the basement level, and stared at his reflection in the mirrored doors. White tux jacket, pale face, blue eyes too wide, blonde hair arranged perfectly by a stylist who had told him he looked like somebody about to be proposed to. Ethan laughed once, but it came out wrong, thin and broken at the edges. The ring box was still in his hand. He opened it, looked at the silver band, then closed it again because the tiny click nearly made him fall apart. Halfway down, the first wave of stress hit him. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a sharp, dizzying rush under his skin, as if every nerve had received terrible news at the same time. His scent blocker warmed against his wrist, then flickered with a faint red light. No, absolutely not. Ethan pressed his thumb over the patch, breathing through his nose the way every Omega was taught in high school health class. Slow inhale, slower exhale. Do not panic. Do not flood. Do not give the world another reason to call you unstable. The elevator doors opened to the private parking garage beneath Blackwood Tower. Concrete. Silver pillars. Security lights buzzing overhead. Rows of luxury cars sleeping like expensive animals. Ethan stepped out too fast, stumbled, and kept walking. He only needed air. A cab. A bathroom with a lock. A universe where Mason had not smiled while wearing his future around his neck. Another warning pulse flashed from the blocker. Ethan tore it off before it could burn his skin, but the damage was done. A faint trace of Omega scent slipped into the cold garage air, soft as spilled vanilla, anxious as rain on hot pavement. 3 Alpha guests near the elevator turned their heads. Ethan froze. Their expressions changed from casual boredom to recognition, then curiosity. Not danger, not yet, but enough to make his stomach twist. He backed away, one step, then another, until his shoulder bumped the side of a matte black town car with windows dark enough to swallow the lights. The rear door opened. Ethan jerked around, ready to apologize, ready to run, ready to disappear completely. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black overcoat that looked too simple to be anything but custom. For one impossible second, Ethan thought Adrian had found him. Same sharp jaw, same silver blonde hair, same Blackwood face carved with money, power, and every unfair advantage in the world. Then the man looked at him, and the illusion shattered. Adrian's eyes were bright ice. This man's eyes were winter after midnight. Quiet, unmoved, deep enough to hide. Entire storms. Ethan's breath caught. The stranger glanced once at the broken scent blocker in Ethan's hand, once at the alphas by the elevator, and then back to Ethan's face. He did not reach for him. He did not crowd him. He simply removed his coat and held it out, leaving several careful feet between them. "You are Ethan Parker," he said, voice low enough to calm the air around it. Ethan tightened his grip on the ring box. "You look like him." Something unreadable moved across the man's face. Unfortunately, the word was so dry, so cold, so perfectly timed that Ethan almost laughed again, and almost crying was somehow worse. "Who are you?" he whispered. The man's gaze shifted toward the elevator, where the watching alphas suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Damian Blackwood. Ethan knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name, but nobody said it loudly at parties. Adrian was the face on magazine covers. Damian was the rumor behind locked doors, the twin who handled the family's shadow businesses, the man who could make powerful people reconsider bad ideas without raising his voice. Ethan should have been afraid. Maybe he was. But Damian only extended the coat a little farther and said, "You can stay here and let them turn your pain into gossip, or you can come with me and decide what happens next when you are not shaking in a parking garage." Ethan looked down at the coat. Black wool, clean lines, a faint scent of cedar, cold air, and smoke after snowfall. Not demanding, just present. Behind him, the elevator chimed again, and somewhere 47 floors above, Adrian was probably still smiling beside Mason, certain Ethan would blame himself first. Ethan took the coat. The inside of Damian Blackwood's car was silent in a way that made every sound feel expensive. The soft click of the door closing, the low hum of the engine, the faint rush of rain beginning to tap against the windshield, even though the sky had been clear an hour ago. Ethan sat in the back seat with Damian's coat wrapped around his shoulders, staring at his own hands like they belonged to someone who had made better choices. The ring box was still there. Of course it was. A tiny velvet coffin for an engagement that had never lived long enough to breathe. Across from him, Damian sat with one ankle crossed over his knee, posture calm, expression unreadable, his phone resting face down beside him. He had not asked Ethan to explain. He had not offered fake comfort. He had not said, "I am sorry," in that empty rich person voice people used when they were mostly sorry the problem had become visible. He simply waited, and somehow that was worse. Ethan's throat tightened. "You knew my name." Damian looked at him. "Yes. You knew where I would be. I knew where Adrian would put you." The words landed softly, but they did not land gently. Ethan turned toward the tinted window. The parking garage lights slid over the glass in pale stripes as the car moved toward the private exit. "That is not an answer. It is the cleanest one I have." Ethan let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "Great. Fantastic. I got cheated on and kidnapped by a fortune cookie. Damien's eyes flickered, not quite amusement, not quite surprise. You were not kidnapped. The door is unlocked. The driver will take you anywhere in the city. Ethan reached for the handle on instinct, then stopped because his hands were shaking too hard to prove anything. And if I ask to go back upstairs? Then I will tell the driver to turn around. Damien paused. But I will also ask why you want to return to a room where two people were discussing how to use your trust against you. Ethan went still. The rain sharpened against the roof. You heard them? Damien picked up his phone, tapped once, and turned the screen toward Ethan. A security still filled the display. Adrian and Mason in the bonding suite. The contract on the table. Mason's necklace catching the light. Ethan's stomach dipped so fast he thought he might be sick. Why do you have that? Because my brother has been careless for months. Damien's voice stayed level, but something colder moved beneath it. Careless with money. Careless with power. Careless with people who deserved better than being filed under assets. Ethan looked up slowly. People like me? Yes. One word. No decoration. No pity. Somehow it hit harder than any speech could have. Ethan pressed the ring box against his palm until the edges hurt. Pain was useful. Pain gave him something smaller to focus on. So what am I then? Evidence? A witness? Another piece on the blackwood chessboard? Damien leaned forward slightly, stopping far enough away that the space between them still belonged to Ethan. Right now, you are a man in shock wearing a coat that is too big for him. Ethan blinked. The answer was so plain, so absurdly human, that it cracked something in his chest. He looked down at the black while swallowing his white sleeves. He did look ridiculous. Like a runaway groom. Like a ghost who had stolen winter. And later, he asked. Damien's gaze did not move from his face. Later, you decide whether you want to disappear quietly or make them regret assuming you would. The city opened beyond the garage ramp, wet streets shining under traffic lights, Manhattan glittering ahead like a blade washed clean. Ethan should have been thinking about home, about bed, about blocking Mason's number and burning every photo that had Adrian's hand resting on his shoulder. Instead, he thought about Adrian's voice saying, he will blame himself first. The worst part was how close that had come to being true. Damien seemed to read the shift in his breathing. Do not start building a prison out of their choices. Ethan swallowed. You make that sound easy. It is not. Damien looked out at the rain. But the first rule of surviving my family is simple. Stop asking permission from the person holding the lock. The car passed beneath a wash of neon, and for one brief second, Damien's face reflected beside Ethan's in the glass, so like Adrian's that it hurt, and so unlike him that Ethan could breathe. Ethan closed the ring box at last, and set it on the seat between them. Not thrown, not crushed, just placed down carefully, like a burden he was no longer willing to carry in his hand. Ethan did not remember falling asleep. One moment the city had been sliding past the car window in streaks of gold and rain, and the next he was waking beneath a gray cashmere blanket in a room that looked too quiet to belong to anyone real. The ceiling was high, the walls soft white, the windows stretching from floor to ceiling with Manhattan spread beyond them like a jewelry box left open in the dark. For several seconds, he did not move. His body felt heavy with exhaustion, but not unsafe. That confused him most. Safety had always been loud with Adrian, announced in expensive gifts, security details, locked doors, and instructions disguised as concern. This room offered none of that. A glass of water waited on the nightstand. A fresh scent blocker sat beside it, still sealed. His phone rested on a small tray, fully charged, along with his wallet, keys, and the velvet ring box he wished had vanished into traffic. Ethan stared at it until the ache came back, slow and precise. Not a wave, a needle. The bedroom door opened after a soft knock, and an older woman stepped in wearing navy scrubs beneath a cream cardigan. Her silver hair was pinned neatly at the back of her head, and her expression carried the calm authority of someone who had seen rich families make disasters and had stopped being impressed decades ago. Good morning, Mr. Parker. I am Dr. Helen Walsh. I specialize in omega stress responses and scent regulation. Mr. Blackwood asked me to check on you only if you were awake and only if you consented. Ethan blinked. He said that twice. She set her medical bag on a chair, not the bed. Another careful distance. Another choice placed in his hands instead of taken from them. Ethan swallowed around the strange tightness in his throat. I consent. The exam was simple. Pulse, temperature. A small scanner passed over his wrist. A few questions about dizziness, food, and whether the damaged blocker had burned him. Nothing invasive. Nothing humiliating. Dr. Walsh spoke to him like a person, not a problem. When she finished, she handed him the sealed blocker. Your system is stabilizing. You were frightened, not broken. Do not let anyone tell you those are the same thing. Ethan looked away fast, because crying in front of a kind stranger at 9 in the morning felt unfair to everyone involved. After she left, he found clothes folded on the bench at the foot of the bed, soft black sweatpants, a white shirt, socks still in the package. No designer logo screaming ownership. No note. Just necessities. He changed slowly, then followed the faint smell of coffee down a hallway lined with abstract paintings and too much silence. Damien stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his forearms, reading something on a tablet while a coffee machine whispered beside him. He looked up once, eyes moving over Ethan's face, not his body, checking for damage without making a performance of it. Dr. Walsh said you were stable. She also said you were bossy. She has known me since I was 14. Her opinion is legally protected. Ethan almost smiled. It startled him so badly that he looked down at the marble island. Damien pushed a mug toward him. Chamomile. No caffeine until she clears it. You keep tea in a penthouse that looks like a museum where feelings go to die. I keep many shocking things. Towels. Bandages. A toaster. This time Ethan did smile, small and unwilling. The room changed around it. Not warmer exactly, but less impossible. Then his phone vibrated on the counter. Adrian's name filled the screen. Once. Twice. Then Mason's. Ethan's smile disappeared as if someone had turned off the light. Damien did not reach for the phone. He did not tell him to answer or ignore it. He only leaned back against the counter and waited. Ethan watched Adrian's name appear again, remembered the contract, the necklace, the calm cruelty of being discussed like paperwork. His thumb hovered over the screen. For years, he would have answered before the second ring. He would have apologized for worrying him. He would have made himself smaller just to fit inside Adrian's patience. Not this time. Ethan pressed decline and set the phone face down. His hand shook, but it stayed there. Damien's gaze softened by a fraction, so slight Ethan might have imagined it. Good, Damien said quietly. One word, but it settled over Ethan like the first steady breath after a long fall. Adrian arrived at Damien's penthouse 23 minutes after Ethan declined the call, which was either impressive or pathetic depending on how much credit one wanted to give a billionaire with a private driver. And no emotional self-control. The building did not announce him. There was no dramatic knock, no shouted demand from the hallway, no security alarm blaring through the quiet kitchen. 1 second, Ethan was holding a mug of chamomile tea with both hands, trying to remember how breathing worked when his phone stayed silent. The next, Damien's tablet lit up with a private elevator alert, and the air changed. Damien glanced at the screen, then at Ethan. Adrian is here. Ethan's fingers tightened around the mug. Of course he is. His voice sounded steadier than he felt, which was a small miracle and possibly the tea. Do you want him removed from the building? Damien asked. Not handled. Not punished. Removed. Clean word. Clear choice. Ethan looked toward the tall windows, where morning had turned the city silver and bright, as if the world had no idea it was hosting the worst day of his life. For one tempting second, he wanted to say yes. He wanted Adrian to be turned away before he could speak, before he could wrap betrayal in logic and make Ethan feel unreasonable for bleeding where he had been cut. But then Ethan saw the velvet ring box sitting on the counter, quiet and ugly in the sunlight. He set his mug down. No, let him come up. Damien studied him for a moment. You do not owe him a conversation. I know. Ethan swallowed. That is why I want one. The private elevator opened into the living room with a soft tone, and Adrian Blackwood stepped out like he owned every inch of air between the walls. He wore the same suit from the gala, still perfect, still expensive, still carrying the faint polish scent Ethan used to associate with safety. Now it only made his stomach tighten. Adrian's eyes went straight to Damien first, cold recognition passing between twins like a language built from old wounds. Then he looked at Ethan, and something in his face shifted. Not guilt, not even concern. Possession, startled by resistance. Ethan, Adrian said, carefully gentle. You scared me. The old Ethan would have apologized. The reflex rose in him, humiliating and automatic, like a bruise pressed by memory. He felt it reach for his tongue. He stopped it there. That must have been difficult for you. Adrian's mouth tightened. Damien looked down at his tablet, and Ethan had the insane feeling the man was trying not to smile. This is not a joke, Adrian said. You left a formal event with my brother in front of half the board. I left after hearing you and Mason discuss my signature like it was office furniture. Silence cut across the room. Adrian did not flinch, but his eyes sharpened. You misunderstood. Ethan almost laughed. There it was. The first brick in the prison. Misunderstood. Overreacted. Too sensitive. Too Omega. He walked to the counter, picked up the ring box, and placed it on the glass coffee table between them. The small sound it made was softer than thunder, but it felt just as final. I understood every word. Adrian looked at the box, then back at him. You are upset. I understand that. Mason was a mistake. No, Ethan said, surprised by how calm he sounded. A mistake is forgetting a meeting. A mistake is ordering oat milk when someone asked for whole milk. You made a plan. Adrian stepped closer. Not much, just enough for Ethan's body to remember old patterns. Damien did not move, but his presence settled behind Ethan like a locked door. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. Are you hiding behind him now? He asked softly. Ethan felt the sting, but it did not sink as deep as it once would have. He lifted his chin. No, I am standing where I can finally see you clearly. For the first time, Adrian had no immediate answer. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was full of every dinner Ethan had waited through, every secret entrance, every promise postponed until Ethan had trained himself to be grateful for crumbs. Adrian reached for the ring box. Ethan placed his hand over it first. Do not. Adrian froze. Ethan's hand shook, but it stayed there. This does not belong to you anymore, Ethan said. And neither do I. Adrian stared at Ethan's hand over the ring box as if the furniture had started giving orders. For a long second, nobody moved. The city kept shining beyond the windows. The tea cooled on the kitchen island. Somewhere below them, thousands of people were probably doing normal morning things, buying coffee, missing trains, complaining about weather, living in blessed ignorance of the fact that Ethan Parker had just told Adrian Blackwood no and had not immediately burst into flames. Adrian recovered first, because men like him treated embarrassment as a scheduling error. His expression smoothed, his shoulders settled, and that familiar executive calm slid back over him like armor. You are emotional, he said. I am leaving before I say something unkind. Ethan blinked once. The sentence should have hurt. It should have made him shrink. Instead, it sounded almost boring, like a script Adrian had used too many times and forgotten to update. You already said enough last night. Adrian's gaze flicked to Damien. This is family business. Damien finally looked up from his tablet. Then you should have behaved like family. The words were quiet, almost lazy, but Adrian's jaw tightened as if they had landed exactly where Damien intended. For a moment, the twins looked so alike that Ethan felt a strange vertigo, like standing between a reflection and the thing it had failed to copy. Same face, same blood, completely different weather. Adrian's phone buzzed. He ignored it. Then Damien's tablet chimed. Damien glanced down, read something, and turned the screen toward Ethan. The board moved the emergency review to Friday morning. Ethan frowned. Emergency review? Adrian's calm finally cracked at the edge. That is confidential. Damien tilted his head. So was your revised bonding contract, apparently. Ethan looked from one brother to the other, cold gathering under his ribs. What review? Damien set the tablet on the coffee table, screen facing Ethan, not Adrian. There were names, dates, voting blocks, legal notes, and a phrase that made Ethan's stomach tighten. Alpha stability requirement. Damien spoke before Ethan could ask. The Blackwood board is deciding whether Adrian remains chief executive officer after the merger closes. To keep the seat, he needs to present a stable domestic alliance before Friday. A committed Omega bond would protect him from several challenges. Ethan's throat went dry. Me. Originally, Damien said. Adrian exhaled. Sharply. You make it sound uglier than it is. Ethan turned to him slowly. Please make it prettier, then. Adrian's mouth opened. Nothing came out fast enough. That was answer enough. Damien continued, voice even. Mason was not a replacement chosen because of affection. He was pressure. A way to remind you that you could be swapped out if you resisted, then brought back grateful when Adrian offered forgiveness for pain he created. The room blurred at the edges, not from scent, not from panic, but from the sheer insult of it. Ethan had thought he was grieving a relationship. He had been standing inside a strategy document. Adrian stepped forward. "Ethan, listen to me." "No," Ethan said. It came out small, but it came out. He looked at Damien. "What happens if I refuse to sign anything?" Adrian frames last night as an Omega stress episode. Mason supports the story. The board protects the company. You become unstable, jealous, unreliable. Damien paused. Publicly, it would be clean. Privately, it would be cruel. Ethan sat down because his legs had requested a meeting with gravity. Adrian looked almost pained now, which somehow made Ethan angrier. "I would not let it go that far." "You let it begin," Ethan said. Another silence. Better than the first. Sharper. Damien walked to a drawer beneath the bookshelf and removed a slim black folder. He placed it in front of Ethan. "There is another option." Ethan stared at it. "That sounds ominous." "It is paperwork." Paperwork is always ominous. Against his will, Ethan almost smiled again. Damien opened the folder. A temporary protection agreement. 72 hours. You appear at the board review under my legal protection. Not bonded. Not claimed. Protected. Adrian cannot question your stability without challenging mine, and he will not do that in front of the board. Adrian's eyes went flat. You would drag him into your world to punish me. Damien looked at him, cold as February. No, I would give him a door you forgot to lock. Ethan looked down at the contract. His name was printed there, but for once, it did not feel like a trap. There was a blank space for his signature, waiting, not demanding. 3 days. 1. Agreement. 1 chance to stop being the easiest person in the room to hurt. Ethan picked up the pen. His hand trembled, but this time, it felt less like fear and more like the beginning of motion. After Friday, he said, looking at Damien, I walk away if I want to. Damien did not hesitate. Yes. Ethan signed. Signing Damien Blackwood's contract did not feel like victory. It felt like stepping onto a frozen lake and trusting the ice because the fire behind him had become worse. Adrian left without another word, but his silence followed him out of the penthouse like smoke under a door. Ethan expected Damien to celebrate, or at least look satisfied. Instead, Damien closed the black folder, set it inside a locked drawer, and told Ethan to eat breakfast before making any further life-altering decisions. It was so practical, so aggressively normal, that Ethan almost asked whether the Mafia came with a meal plan. He did not. He sat at the kitchen island while Damien placed toast, eggs, fruit, and a small bottle of orange juice in front of him with the emotional warmth of a hospital cafeteria and the precision of a man defusing a bomb. Ethan stared at the plate. Do you always feed your temporary legal problems? Damien poured coffee into a black mug. Only the ones who look ready to faint into my marble floor. That is thoughtful in a terrifying way. I have been told it is part of my charm. Ethan looked up. Damien's mouth had not moved, but something near his eyes had softened, just enough to make the room feel less like a showroom and more like a place someone could survive a morning. The softness vanished when Damien's phone buzzed. He read the message, and the air shifted again. Not danger exactly. Memory. There is something you should see, Damien said. He led Ethan down the hall to a study hidden behind a plain white door. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, this room was not minimal. It was full of files, old photographs, marked legal documents, and a corkboard covered in timelines. At the center was a photograph of a young Omega with dark curls, a bright smile, and a yellow scarf. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Who was that? Damien stood beside the desk, hands still at his sides. Oliver Hayes. He worked for Blackwood Industries 3 years ago. Ethan waited, but Damien did not continue right away. For the first time since Ethan had met him, words seemed to cost him. Adrian selected him for a private alliance before a shareholder vote. Oliver refused after discovering the terms were not what he had been promised. The family called it a misunderstanding. The board called it a health leave. Oliver signed a settlement and moved to Portland within 48 hours. Ethan looked at the photograph again. The smile seemed different now, smaller somehow, trapped in paper. You helped him leave? I found him a lawyer. A safe apartment. A job away from us. Damien's voice was flat, but his fingers curled once against his palm. I was too late to stop the damage to his reputation. Ethan turned toward him. That is why you were watching Adrian. Damien did not deny it. My brother treats people like contracts. I learned to read the fine print. The sentence should have sounded cold. It did not. It sounded tired. Ethan suddenly saw it, the shape beneath Damien's control. Not a man who enjoyed shadows, but a man who had lived in them long enough to keep other people from being dragged there alone. You are not doing this for the company, Ethan said quietly. Damien looked at the rain sliding down the study window. No. And not just to hurt Adrian. No. Ethan's chest tightened in a new way, not sweet, not easy, but warmer than the anger that had carried him through the morning. Then why help me? Damien finally looked at him. His eyes were still winter, but not empty winter. Winter with a house lit somewhere in the distance. Because last night, you stood outside that door holding a ring, and no one in that room deserved the amount of faith you brought with you. Ethan looked away fast, blinking hard. He had expected strategy. He had expected revenge. He had not expected to be seen so clearly that it felt like both comfort and exposure. On Damien's desk, Oliver Hayes smiled from a frozen year Ethan had never known. On the counter outside, Ethan's untouched breakfast waited. And somewhere across the city, Adrian was probably already rewriting the story to make himself the victim. For the first time, Ethan did not wonder whether he could survive Adrian's version. He wondered what his own version would sound like when he finally stopped whispering it. By Thursday afternoon, Ethan had learned 3 things about preparing for a Blackwood board review. First, rich people could make betrayal sound like a quarterly concern if the font was clean enough. Second, Damien owned more black suits than any emotionally healthy man should. Third, the hardest part of revenge was not anger. It was staying calm long enough to let the truth arrive before your hands started shaking. The penthouse had turned into a quiet war room. Legal notes covered the dining table. Dr. Walsh had delivered a clean bill of health and 3 extra scent blockers with the expression of a woman who would personally scold the entire board if they annoyed her patient. Damien moved through it all like a storm wearing cuff links, controlled, silent, precise. He did not hover over Ethan. He did something worse. He noticed everything. When Ethan stopped drinking water, a glass appeared near his elbow. When his breathing shortened, the room somehow became quieter. When Adrian sent another message that read, "We can still fix this," Damien did not ask to see it. He only slid the trash folder open on Ethan's phone and said, "Some doors close better when you stop polishing the handle." Ethan hated that the line helped. He hated more that it made him smile. At 4:17, the front desk called. Mason Reed was downstairs, crying hard enough to worry the concierge. Ethan's first instinct was old and painful. Mason was upset. Mason needed him. Mason had once held his hand through a fever, brought soup after a bad workday, remembered his coffee order and his mother's birthday. Memory was cruel like that. It showed up wearing the face of proof. Damien stood beside the window, phone in hand, expression unreadable. You can refuse. Ethan looked at the city, then at the folder with Oliver Hayes's photograph tucked inside. No. I want to know which version of him comes up here. Mason arrived with red eyes, damp hair, and a paper bag from the little bakery Ethan used to love near Washington Square Park. He looked smaller than he had at the gala, wrapped in an oversized tan coat. Clutching the bag like an apology could be purchased with lemon muffins. "Ethan," he whispered. "I am so sorry." The words hit exactly where they were designed to hit. Ethan felt his chest tighten, but he stayed on the far side of the kitchen island. Distance was a miracle with countertop edges. For what part? Mason flinched beautifully. Too beautifully. All of it. Adrian lied to me too. He said you two were over. He said you were only staying because of the bond paperwork. Ethan almost laughed, but the sound would have come out too sharp. And the necklace? Mason touched his throat, where the blue stone was gone. I was stupid. He pushed the bakery bag forward. I brought your favorite. And tea. The lavender kind you like. I thought maybe we could sit down like people who still know each other. For 1 second, Ethan wanted that so badly it embarrassed him. He wanted a universe where Mason had only been foolish, not cruel. A universe where friendship could be bruised but not counterfeit. He reached for the paper cup before Damien spoke from across the room. "Do not drink that." Mason went still. Ethan's hand froze above the lid. Damien walked over without hurry, took the cup, and set it beside a small silver testing strip from Dr. Walsh's medical kit. The strip changed color in silence. Mason's face lost every careful shade of grief. Ethan stared at the cup, then at him. "What did you do?" Mason's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "It was only supposed to make you anxious, not hurt you." Adrian said if you seemed unstable tomorrow, the board would protect you from Damien. The room became so quiet Ethan could hear the city far below, horns and sirens, and life moving on without asking permission. Damien placed his phone on the counter and tapped play. Mason's voice filled the kitchen, recorded from the private elevator, nervous and clear, practicing lines about tea, forgiveness, and Ethan overreacting under stress. Mason covered his mouth. Ethan did not. He stood very still, feeling. Something inside him finally stopped begging. "You were my best friend," he said. Mason whispered his name like it could still unlock a softer door. Ethan stepped back. "No. You were someone who knew where I was tender and handed Adrian a map." Damien did not touch Ethan. He only stood nearby, steady as the edge of winter. For once, Ethan did not need to be held upright. Mason looked at Damien, then at the elevator, understanding too late that the performance was over. Ethan picked up the bakery bag and placed it in the trash. It was a small sound. Paper against emptiness. A funeral for the last excuse. Friday arrived in gray clouds and a cold that made Manhattan look honest. Ethan stood in the executive conference room on the 47th floor of Blackwood Tower, one level below the suite where his life had split apart, while the board waited around a glass table cold enough to bury a wedding. Adrian stood at the head in a flawless charcoal suit, Mason pale beside him, and Damien stayed at Ethan's left, near enough to steady the air, but not near enough to claim him. Adrian spoke first, polished and poisonous, wrapping betrayal in phrases like stability, public trust, and Omega stress responses. Ethan listened until the chairwoman asked if he had anything to add. "Yes," he said, his hands still folded. "I would like the board to hear the truth before anyone votes on a lie." Damien placed a drive on the table. Adrian's voice filled the room from the bonding suite, explaining how Ethan would sign anything, followed by Mason's elevator confession, each apology turning to ash. No one gasped. Board members simply adjusted glasses and calculated consequences, which somehow felt worse. When silence fell, the chairwoman asked whether Ethan had entered any binding agreement with Adrian. "No." With Damien? "No." Adrian's face flickered with arrogant hope. "Then what is your relationship to Damien Blackwood?" Ethan looked at Damien, who stood open, waiting, giving him the choice no one else had. "He protected my right to speak for myself. That is all." Adrian snapped. "So this was revenge." Ethan met his eyes. "At first, I thought I wanted revenge. But revenge still means arranging your life around the person who hurt you. I am done arranging anything around you." Minutes later, Adrian was removed from merger leadership, Mason escorted out by legal counsel, and snow softened the windows. Ethan set the velvet ring box before Adrian. "I chose myself." At the elevator, he asked Damien, "After today, I can still leave?" "Yes. And if I don't want to?" Damien's breath changed. "Then I will make room." Ethan stepped inside beside him, finally owning every piece of himself.